Hey friends, welcome back to Hopeful and Wholesome. I am bringing you an episode today all about deconditioning. And I think we talk about this a lot, the whole idea of deconditioning. I mean, I say it all the time. And when you're in the human design world and even just kind of the self-development or like healing world, we throw that word around a lot. I think we don't often talk about what it actually is or define it in a really concrete way so we know what it means, like the depth of what it means. I think it's one thing to be like, oh, let's decondition and think it's just like either a switch you can flip on or off, or it's like I can just mentally think about it and think about who I want to become. And it's just, there's just so many layers. It's so much more complex than that. And I want to bring in a piece too about deconditioning that I wish I would have been told before my whole journey in how to navigate the really sticky, tough in-between parts of the letting go of these pieces while I'm stepping into this new version of me. And there's just a lot of nuance around conditioning. So I want to lay the groundwork here. First, I think a lot of people think conditioning is just about mindset or it's about limiting beliefs. And it's like, I just swap these limiting beliefs with new beliefs. And I mean, I guess in its simplest terms, it's kind of true, but it really is so much deeper than that. Because again, that's not something we can really just do on a mental level. And then all of a sudden like, oh, we're fixed, which is another thing I want to bring out. This is not about fixing anything. And I think that's another mistake people make going into the condition or the deconditioning on the deconditioning journey, is thinking that it's something to fix. And I think for multiple reasons. First of all, there's no part of you that needs to be quote unquote fixed, right? There's something I've talked about on the show so much. Just can we honor all pieces of us, even the wounded ones, even the ones that give us the challenges that make us want to, like those pieces. We love all those pieces. The other thing is when you think that there's something to be, quote, fixed, and then you come up upon these new layers later, there's a lot that comes with that. There's a lot of, feeling like you were a failure, and there's a lot of disappointment and dealing with, there's just other things, wounded things that come up from that, thinking that you fixed it, realizing you didn't really fix it and it's still there. Like it's none of that. So I want to just name that first. We're not fixing anything. Well, actually, let's first talk about conditioning, because conditioning isn't so much about thoughts, like what happened to your thoughts. Conditioning has happened to your body, your biology, your nervous system. If you think about the book, The Body Keeps the Score, it's kind of that concept, right? That these things have gotten put into your fascia, your cells, your tissues. This is the conditioning. So it's not just the limiting beliefs and your thoughts that you think all the time. That's kind of a side effect of the conditioning, but it's not the actual conditioning. The conditioning lives in your body. So if we talk about this from kind of a science perspective, just talking about what conditioning is. So your brain is a pattern-making machine. Every experience or message or emotion that's repeated carves a neural pathway, carves a groove, these neurons. So Dr. Joe Dispenza says neurons that fire together wire together. And that's what happens. So these repeated experiences, these repeated messages, repeated emotions, repeated thoughts and beliefs, all of those create neural pathways in your brain. And once they fire together, they wire together. It's like you've uploaded that. It's like, when you upload a new software in your computer, you've uploaded that. Now it's there. And in childhood especially, your brain is a sponge. Your brain is this really receptive vessel. It's your brain is operating in theta brain waves, which is kind of like you're in a hypnotic state for the first 7 years of your life. And so this is when that foundational programming gets installed. Again, just like a software, like you've put it in there and it's there. Those early life experiences, what got you punished, what got you praised, what kept you safe, what made you feel loved, what made you feel not loved, all of these became kind of your default setting. It's your default neural architecture that you've been running ever since. And so your neural pathways, it is the habit, right? It is the belief, the automatic response. It is a groove in your brain that got carved by repetition with emotional charge. That's how it got put in there. Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about this a lot, because when it's attached to an emotion, that's when it gets shoved in there. And so this is why the mindset work and just thinking about it alone doesn't really do anything. It doesn't uproot it. Like, you're not pulling it up from the roots. You can't outthink it. You have to go beneath the thought. You have to go to the conditioning that put the thought there. And the other thing I want to mention too is your conditioning is also, like, yes, it is a part of this, your experiences, but also there's this generational layer to it. Science is showing us now that our bodies hold 7, if not more, generations of trauma in our cells. And so you're also carrying conditioning from your mom and your grandma and your great grandma and your great, right? It keeps going. So you're carrying all that stuff too. So you see how it kind of compounds. So if we think about belief systems, your beliefs are the operating system. So it's like the filter through which all of your incoming information gets interpreted. Most of your core beliefs were installed by people, by some sort of external authority. So that might have been your teachers, your parents, whoever raised you, if you had a caretaker, if you were around your grandparents a lot, or whoever was a guardian, by religion, by culture, by media, by your peers. It's not from your own inner knowing. It's from external authority. That's the key word there, because it basically means that someone else's fears and wounds and beliefs and worldviews became the lens that you learned to see yourself through. That's how the conditioning starts. So these common installed beliefs that you have as a high achieving woman, things like you have to earn your rest or earn your worth, that rest or stillness is laziness, that your needs are too much, that you're only valuable when you're producing. Like, those are all these beliefs that got installed with you. They're installed in you either early on, or again, that generational programming. It was already there. And I think a lot of this is already there when we're born. It's already there. Like, you've got, your work is cut out for you. And when we have these beliefs, these core beliefs that were installed by all of this external noise, this external authority, they stop feeling like beliefs and they start feeling like facts. And that's how deep the conditioning goes. The conditioning that you hold feels like, this is just me. These are my values. This is just me. And then it becomes this invisible part of you, because it's the water that you swim in. And you can't, as I said before in another episode, it's that saying about how, like, the fish can't see through the water, whatever that saying is. You literally can't see it. It's the water you're swimming in, because it just feels like a part of you. And when we look at this from a human design perspective, this is exactly what undefined centers are about. And I talked a lot about this, my hijacked workshop, which I'll put the link to the show notes if you want to jump in there. I highly recommend it, especially since we're talking about deconditioning here. It's just a great way to kind of uncover some of these pieces that might not be so blatant or might not be so conscious for you. But this is what we mean when we talk about undefined centers. It's absorbing and amplifying the energy and the conditioning of the people around you and taking it on as your own identity. So now we've kind of got this 3-layered thing here that installs this conditioning. We have, like I said, that 0 to 7 age range where you're just soaking everything up in your little brain. And so that's putting a lot of conditioning on you. You're born with a lot of it, that generational piece. And then you have to take into account your design, your human design. You're going to absorb specific parts of the conditioning more than others because of your undefined centers. So there's a 3rd layer I want to mention too. So we've talked about the neural pathways, your belief systems, and the last one is your somatic patterns. Going back to the book I mentioned before, The Body Keeps the Score. If you haven't read it, it is a great one to learn about this kind of stuff. It talks about in the book that every emotional experience that was too big to process in the moment, like at the time it happened, got stored in your tissue, the fascia, your nervous system, your cells. And that's how trauma exists, right? And that's how trauma stays in your body. If it was too much for your nervous system to process at the time it was happening, it gets stored in there. And it's kind of like, oh, I'll save you for later because I can't. My nervous system will short circuit if I deal with it right now. So somatic conditioning looks like, somatic meaning like what's happening in your soma, in your body. These are things like, and they talk a lot about this in the book, things like, the chronic bracing in your shoulders and your jaw. Maybe it's your stomach drops when you're about to, have a difficult conversation or speak your opinion on something or speak your truth about something. Maybe it's your chest that tightens when somebody asks for too much and you're afraid to say no. Maybe it's your body that can't fully rest because rest never felt safe. Like, these are stored stories in your body. These are these protective responses from the body that your body has learned and then keeps them running on a loop. I mean, because the fact is, your nervous system doesn't know the difference between a memory and then a threat that's happening in the present moment. So it keeps responding to these old wounds like it's happening right now. And this is Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about whenever you have a memory without an emotional charge, that's when you know it's wisdom. Because if you think about a memory and it still has an emotional charge, you haven't really processed that yet. And so your body doesn't know the difference between a threat, a memory, or a threat in the present moment. And so when you haven't dealt with that, when there's still the emotions and stories attached to that event or situation, it is still looping in your subconscious. It is still part of your nervous system, running the show of your nervous system. And so your body continues to respond to these old wounds like it's happening right now. And this is why the somatic work really is non-negotiable in the deconditioning process, because you can reframe a thought, right? We can shift our perspective on a surface level, but if the body is still holding that original charge, the pattern's going to resurface. I'm going to say it again because this is it's always kind of my rubric, my measuring stick, when he says, if you can think about an event, something that happened to you without emotional charge, then it's wisdom. That's when you know you've let go of the wound, right? And not to say that there's not pieces there that maybe you'll carry the wound with you forever, but it no longer holds that power over you. It no longer has that little program running in your nervous system. It's not running that same loop, and your body's not still responding to that original charge. So the conditioning, we talk about conditioning, it's operating in a lot of levels at the same time. It's neural, like we talked about, it's cognitive, I can think about it, and it's somatic, it's in your body. And this is why the conditioning is so pervasive and why surface level approaches can only get you so far. And that's why I use the multi-level approaches that I do. And I have so many different tools and modalities that I use because some women respond differently than others. Like for some women, it's things like EFT tapping or, a quantum healing session to reduce a sort of hypnosis or NLP work, neurolinguistic programming. Like we can kind of talk through it and find it and work through it in the body. Those work great. For some women, they like things like my frequency recalibration sessions work great because we're looking and reading what their energy field is saying and then just becoming aware and talking about it. So it just depends. Everybody responds to things differently. But the fact is we have to I think it's important that we have different tools in our tool belt to work with the conditioning because the conditioning is operating on all of those different levels, the neural level, the cognitive, and the somatic level. And before I go any further, we talk about the conditioning. The deconditioning process can be really hard. It can be really painful. It can be really tender. And I think it's important to just name going into, if you've never really intentionally worked on the deconditioning process, to go into it knowing that, first of all, none of it is your fault because most of the conditioning that you have in your body was there before you could even question it. Like you didn't give consent for it to be put into your body. It was put there without your consent. The other thing I want to say is you are not your conditioning. It's just, it is a layer of you, but it's not your truth. It's not your soul. It is a part of you. And depending on what you believe, I believe that that's a part of why our souls incarnated here is to heal this conditioning and to let go of these pieces. And if you believe in past lives and that kind of thing, then it could be some sort of, past life thing. Now your soul wants to heal this and that in this life. But the point is, you are not your conditioning and none of it is your fault. The whole point of the deconditioning process is to peel back what was installed by some external authority so you can finally hear what was always true underneath it, who you are, who you were meant to be underneath it all. That's the whole point of the deconditioning process. So if you're deconditioning or the conditioning, so if your conditioning is not something you can fix with just mindset work, then the process of undoing it has to go deeper. Now, the conditioning process can be tricky, it can be challenging. And I want to mention here something, or maybe many things, that I wish someone would have told me first going into this process. First of all, there's this patriarchal belief that is part of our conditioning that life, the world is linear, right? Which is totally false. We know that. I've talked about this before. We know that nothing is linear. Nature is not linear. The markets aren't, the stock market is not linear. Like nothing is linear. But we have this idea going in that healing is linear. Like there's this start line and some finish line at the end. And that is just this linear process, which could not be further from the truth. And I think this is something that derails people the most is you have this idea and maybe you don't go into it totally blind to thinking it's just this one straight line, but maybe you think like it's always going to feel like I'm growing, I'm getting better and I'm growing and I'm getting better and I'm growing, but it's not. Because yes, you're going to grow and get better and grow and get better, but then you're going to have something that whacks you back down where you feel like you are just in the depths of the underworld fighting for your life. And you're like, what happened to all that work I've done so far? Like, I feel like I haven't done anything. It is not linear. You are going to have ups and downs and loop-de-loops and all kinds of things. So I think just setting expectations from the get-go. And I still have to remind myself that. I know that. I know it on a conscious level. I know it on a somatic level that it's not. But I still have to remind myself that because your little ego mind gets into it. And when something comes in and deflates your balloon or knocks you off your horse, and you're like, what the heck? And your ego's like, but I've done this and I'm so much better than this. And all those old stories come up and then you feel like a failure and you feel like all the work you've done, you wasted your time and your energy and all the stories start coming up. And then it kind of compounds those bad feelings. So now it's like bad feelings on top of other bad feelings. And then you stay stuck. So if we can go into it knowing that it's not linear, when we feel those instances, we recognize those instances where it's like you're kind of back down in the valley, knowing that there is another peak coming. Right? We know that there's another way up. Like it's up and down on the way up. That's the trend, right? It's up and down on the way up. Now, sometimes it's up and down, 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 but before you go back up, but there's always a way back up. Because if you're on the journey, you're on the journey. And I know if you're listening to this, you're committed, you're devoted to it. And so there's always going to be an upward trajectory at some point. And then the other thing, I mentioned this at the beginning, but this is something else I wish somebody would have told me from the beginning. So I didn't have to learn it, a long way through, was that whole idea of fixing, right? That conditioning isn't something to fix, that these parts, if we can reframe that and understand that these conditioned parts of you were keeping you safe, they were keeping you loved, they kept you in this feeling of belonging. Like it was all about safety, and that's our bodies are wired for safety. So whatever flaws you think you have, or whatever these things are that you're like, feeling like that about, it exists just to keep you safe. That's it. Now, we can also recognize, like we can hold that duality of like, there's part of you that thinks it's keeping you safe, but your soul, right? That higher part of you is like, but no, it's actually not. Like we can recognize that. But I think if we can shift that perspective from fixing to meeting, what does it mean to meet, to witness these conditioned parts of us versus fighting it or fixing it? Can we see it as, what can I choose inside of this that is higher? I recognize it. I see it. What is my choice that's higher? Can we see it as, I see this pattern and let me meet it and let me find a new way to move through it, especially when it's patterns that repeat themselves where you're like, no, wait, I've worked on this pattern. I've worked on this part of the conditioning piece like so many times. Okay, it's showing up again. So now I have more resources, right? I've met this one before. I've met this guy before. How do I find a new way to move through it? What is the way I choose higher? What is inside of this now that I can learn from, or I can turn into wisdom? It's meeting it versus fixing it. That's the reframe. And I know this is tricky, especially when it gets hard, especially when you're in the valley, you're in the dark night of the soul, or you're in the underworld, like feel like you're fighting for your life. I know that feeling very well. And I've been going through many of those, especially over the last 12 months. I feel like it's one dark night of the soul after the other. And I'm like, nobody told me this is like a thing that can happen over and over and over again. Like I thought it was like, oh, you have these a couple times in your life. There's no rules here apparently. So it can happen. It can happen lots of times. But the fact is, yes, the deconditioning can be hard and it doesn't always feel good. But for me, it's non-negotiable. And here's why. This is something I've been talking with a mentor of mine about for a while now. And her helping me reframe this has been so powerful. I really think that in order to get to the place where we're finding that true self, right? That soul level self underneath all the layers of conditioning, we have to forget parts of ourselves to remember who we actually are. the forgetting is part of it. Like that's part of our journey here. Because even if by some like magic wand from the age of 0 to 7, like you had this, I mean, it's literally, I would think it's impossible, but just playing hypothetical here. Say from 0 to 7, you had this really insanely perfect life and you had the parents who were like angels on earth, and everywhere you were, all of your friends, and everywhere you went, like there was zero conditioning that happened to you between ages 0 to 7. Even if you had that instance, you still wouldn't be immune to this process because you're still born with so much of it. Generationally speaking, ancestrally speaking, it's still there. So I really believe that we do have to forget parts of ourselves to remember who we actually are. And this forgetting is part of the process. Like this is part of the journey. And when we meet these shadows, we can recognize that what's the saying about, the only way to it is through it. The shadow is the way. The shadow is the path. It's not the obstacle. Ryan Holiday, I think he wrote that book, The Obstacle is the Way. That's the way, right? The buffalo runs straight into the snowstorm when there's a snowstorm. He doesn't run away or stay still. He walks straight through it. That's where your power lives. Your power is not on this side of the obstacle or on the other side of the obstacle. It's through it. That's the path. That's what builds that resiliency in your body and in your nervous system. That's what builds the strength, the fortitude to rise and become even stronger and even more powerful in your own body, in your own soma, in your connection to you and to your soul. So it's through it. And so if we think about this in between, you're on this side of the obstacle or on the other side and the obstacle meaning like the conditioning piece, right? There's kind of this voidy space in between sometimes. And we've talked about the void on the show before. And we can see the void as kind of this empty space where we're just kind of hanging out in the ethers, waiting for things to click or waiting for things to change or waiting for things to shift or feel better. And that's really not what the void is. Again, it's the in-between. So when you're in it, that's where your power lives. This is a generative space. It's not a space that zaps you of your power. This is where you find your power. It's what we access and the undoing in that voidy middle part of the shadow that you cannot access anywhere else. You're not going to access that power once it's done and you're feeling like you're on top of the world. That's not where it happens. And that was something that my mentor mentioned to me one time when, I'm kind of whining about this or that isn't happening and I still feel like I'm kind of hanging out in the void. And she's like, imagine if everything was just going peachy right now. You wouldn't be finding the things you're finding right now. You wouldn't be accessing these parts of you that you're accessing right now. Because when everything's peachy, it's like out of our awareness, out of our consciousness. So it's like forged by fire, right? Like the phoenix rising from the ashes kind of thing. That's what the void is for. And so that's why I really believe the deconditioning is non-negotiable. That's where you find these pieces of you that have been hidden, these true authentic pieces, but you also find your power and you access parts of you that you would not be able to access otherwise. It's these parts of you that you access because it's like trial by fire, into the shadow, into the storm, into the depths of it. Like that's where you find it. And another reason that I think it's non-negotiable is because, like, just from a human design perspective, hey, y'all, we'll get right back to the episode. But first, let me ask you this. You've built a vision that others admire. And you've built something that you're really proud of. But behind the scenes, your body feels like it's lagging behind. It just can't quite catch up to your brilliance and your mission that you have. That late night second wind, the foggy mornings, the hormone shifts, the endless push and forcing. You can't strategize your way out of that. And you already know you don't need more supplements. You don't need another supplement stack. You also don't need another side hustle disguised as self-care, because nobody wants to have their health as a side hustle. This is about recalibrating your entire ecosystem. And that's why I created the Quantum Reset, a premium 3-month high-touch healing experience for visionary women who are ready to feel as powerful in their bodies as they do in their business. Inside, we decode your nervous system, your minerals, your hormones. We read your labs like the sacred text that it is, so we have actual answers. And then we pair that with deep energetic recalibration, subconscious release. We use gene keys, we use human design, and true embodied healing. This isn't about fixing burnout, because that's not what we're doing here. This is about becoming the woman whose body is powerful, whose body is completely electric, whose energy, clarity, radiance finally matches the size of her mission. If you know your success isn't meant to cost you your vitality, and you're ready for a science-backed, spirit-led reset, then the quantum reset is your invitation. So check the link in the show notes or send me a message on Instagram, and let's bring your body back online with your brilliance. Now, let's get back to the show. When you've been living someone else's strategy or authority, living by someone else's rules, trying to run on energy that was never yours, that is literally running your body ragged. So that's another reason why I think it's not negotiable, is for you to have the energy, the vision, and run, the mission that you're here to lead. You have to uncover those parts where you're doing it by other people's rules and where you're siphoning your energy that way, right? Where the energy leaks are coming, so that you can do it without tearing your body to pieces at the same while you're trying to build the thing or create the thing or be of service to the world, right? We can't do that when our energy is leaking all over the place. So the deconditioning part it's part of it. Like it really is non-negotiable. Now let's talk about what deconditioning actually looks like when you're in it. And I think this is something that, I don't know, I feel like a lot of people don't talk about this, like what it looks like when you're actively in the deconditioning process, because I think a lot of times we think it's all roses and rainbows and it's like this glow up, and it doesn't look like you're swimming in the muck and maybe feels like your life is falling apart, because that's how it looks sometimes. Maybe you feel like, and maybe when you feel like that, you're like, what am I doing wrong? Like, is this right? This can't be right. This is supposed to feel good, right? I'm getting rid of these pieces that aren't mine. It's supposed to feel good, but it doesn't always. And I also want to say this, it doesn't always have to feel really crappy either. It's not like the whole part of the deconditioning process is doom and gloom and terrible and horrible and you're in the shadow. Like it's not. I also don't want that to be something that's making you fearful of going on the journey if you haven't started. But I think when you get to the really juicy parts, I say that because when you look back, you're like, oh no, that was a juicy one. When you get to those parts, it's not like, I don't believe that God or the universe is going to throw you into the deep end without giving you some time to acclimate to those kinds of things. So I feel like when you really go into the depths, again, there's no rules to this, but I would say for the most part, you've kind of worked your way up to that. So it kind of it'll start lighter. Maybe it starts lighter and then, you get into the heavier stuff deeper into your journey, but your nervous system is going to calibrate every time. So I was talking about that fortitude. So when you go through something tricky, something sticky, right, you're building that resilience, that fortitude in your nervous system. And so that it's ready when something else comes your way. So it's not like everything's going to come at you at one time and your life falls apart all at once. Sometimes it can feel like that. But what it actually looks like when you're walking through each dimension, we talked about the emotional piece, there's the neural piece, there's emotional pieces, there's spiritual and physical and relational pieces. I want you to see what it feels like. And the reason I want to name this too is the reason I said a second ago, because sometimes you can wonder if you're doing it wrong. I also feel like I should say there's no wrong way to do this. There's no wrong way to decondition and work through these things, but you can feel like either giving up or you can feel like this can't be right. So I want to just name some of these pieces to let you know you're on the right path and there's light at the end of the tunnel. So we're looking at it from a mental perspective. A lot of times this looks like self-questioning, like an increased level of self-questioning. Things that used to feel certain, now you're like it's a little fuzzy, it's a little murky. I know for me, that was a big one where it's, I had these big goals and big aspirations. And then it's not that I didn't have them anymore, but I think things were starting to shift for me where it literally in my head, when I'm thinking through these, it literally became murky. Like there was like this kind of fog over it when I would think about it. And there was like this mist, like it wasn't as clear. This is totally normal, by the way. It's totally normal because essentially this means you're calibrating to this new version of you that might have bigger goals and aspirations or different. They might shift a little bit. So this increased self-questioning thing is totally normal. Another thing you might experience that there are old identities and roles that start to feel like parts of you that just don't fit anymore. Like you feel maybe a little performative, or like you're putting on a costume, like you're wearing something that's not, it doesn't feel like you anymore. These roles that you've taken on as your own, or identities. The other thing is with decision making. Sometimes decision making might feel harder. And I think this is important. I actually think this is a really good one, because I think when decisions feel harder and you feel like, why am I so indecisive all of a sudden? It is probably most likely because you're no longer running on autopilot. You're not running on autopilot conditioning, where your conditioning is just making all your decisions for you. So you have to actually feel into the choices instead of just defaulting to the old programming and letting your old programming make the decisions for you. So I feel like that's a really good sign. If you're finding yourself having a hard time making decisions, this is a good sign. And another one that's kind of more of on the mental side of things, that dang inner critic can get real loud before it gets quiet. Your inner critic is part of this conditioned self, and the conditioned self is fighting so hard to stay relevant. There's fear there. There's fear. Remember what I told you, your body is wired for safety. It doesn't feel safe to let pieces of you go for the most part. And so you have these conditioned parts of you that have been with you your entire life, and in some cases well before this life. And it's a scary thing for your body, your mind, your little ego mind, your conditioned self, to let go of those things. So your inner critic can often get really loud before it gets quiet, because that part of you is just fighting so hard to stay relevant, because that's what feels safe. That's what feels comfortable. Now, if we look at this from an emotional perspective, now there are a lot of emotions that come up. So I'm not going to go through the whole gamut, because it is infinite. The list is infinite. I think grief is a big one. There's a mini episode I did probably at the end of probably more towards the beginning of this year, beginning of 2026. If you want to go back, one of my little magnetic minutes of hope that I did talking about grief. And this one is very real. And this is one that it's just coming up over and over for me over the past probably 2 months. And I recognize it. I didn't recognize it at first, and I couldn't figure it out at first. And something triggered in my mind one day. I was waking up at the exact same time every night. So I'm looking at my little like Chinese medicine body clock, and I'm like, okay, it's the lungs. The lungs carry grief. I'm like, that's weird. Like, I don't think I have unprocessed grief. Like, what is this grief? And so I sat with it a while and sat with it, and it probably was, and it happened. I mean, this was probably, I'm not kidding, this was probably a 2-3 week span. It's literally at the same time every single night. It was so annoying. Sometimes I'd be able to go back to sleep. Sometimes I wouldn't, but it was the same time every night. And so a few weeks later, things kind of started to become more clear, and I recognized I have been, and I'd been seeing, and there's other signs that started coming up, other signs around grief, other signs around like old identities. And I have these crazy things that happen in some shamanic journeys with the coach of mine, like just some crazy stuff was happening. Finally, I was able to start putting the pieces together. And I had kept asking, when I'm journaling and when I'm praying, I'm just like, I'm asking for clarity. Like I'm asking, like, what's the next step? I just felt like my feet were in cement. Like I just didn't know what the next step was, like what's next for me, all that. And that was when it finally became clear to me, the grief part, because I recognized when I had this like really intense journaling session, and then I had this meditation session where it all was just like this epiphany that I had. And it was grief. And the grief for me was letting go of these pieces that I was still holding on to. And I've experienced that before. Like I'm not new to that, but I feel like I had done that so much. I'm like, what else could I possibly be, me and my little monkey mind wanting to think like, oh no, I've done all the work, knowing I haven't. But, I recognized that there were these very specific pieces, and I was able to identify like very specific parts in my journaling practice over the next like probably few days after that, when it came through, that I had really been holding on to and been kind of shoving down, and just these new pieces are ready to come through. And so I tell you that story because the grief thing is real, and the grief thing can pop up more and more, like multiple times, but it sometimes can be surprising, and it can sometimes be a confusing emotion. But when you're releasing a version of you, it is your body has to let that part of you go. And that because the grief is there because that part of you kept you safe for a long time. In a lot of cases, made you successful and it helped you in a lot of ways, in a lot of cases. But even if that version was keeping you small and holding you back from the bigness that you're meant for, the grief is still there. So I encourage you, I would say grief, and the rage is another one that can come up, anger or rage, especially when you start to see clearly how so much of your life was shaped by so much external authority that you never consented to, that you didn't give consent to take over your mind and your body. Anger and rage are real. Like those are real emotions. And so the grief, the anger, the rage, I feel like some of those can be the most common. And I encourage you to just like feel into those. And this is what I always encourage my clients to do too. Like feel into the depths of them. I told myself this not too long ago. I was like in it. I was really going through it and like in the underbelly of the underworld, like emotional breakdown, the whole thing. And I remember there was a time for a long while where those deep, just like guttural, like sobbing, crying, like those emotions wouldn't have felt, feeling them fully wouldn't have felt safe and wouldn't have felt, I would have just kind of like, I would have cut it off, right? I would have felt them a little bit, but then I would eventually just cut it off. But I told myself, like, just sit through it, like, just be with it, like, just be in the muck, be in the dirty stuff, be in the muck, be in the yuck, and be in the hard stuff. Like just sit with it and be in it instead of trying to figure out when it's going to stop, when it's going to be over. Also, instead of trying to figure out where it's all coming from, which I knew at the time, I knew, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes you feel these emotions. You're like, where the heck is this coming from? I have no idea. But like, let yourself be with it, because I will tell you that on the other side of that, so many things happened, like so many things happened. And this is probably a story for another day because I feel like it's still unfolding. But I mean, it was just like this portal opened up and so many things happened. So there really is so much on the other side of letting yourself feel into these things, when you're letting these parts of you, letting these parts go. And in recognizing and seeing, and there's just a lot there. The other thing, I want to mention a couple of things about these emotional pieces. I think just recognizing that there could be this increased sensitivity to just life in general, and then also this decreased tolerance for inauthenticity in yourself and in other people. Like you have no threshold for anyone else's BS, your own or other people. Like you can spot it, you can point it out. It drives you mad. It drives you bonkers. Like I feel like this is another piece of it, because you're recognizing where you've been living by your own BS. So now you can see in other people and it might drive you crazy. So there's those pieces that are totally normal. And then the last piece about the emotional piece is recognizing that old wounds are probably going to resurface that you thought you had handled. And this could happen throughout your journey, like forever, for the rest of your life. I don't necessarily believe that all of these wounded parts of us go away. And I don't see that as the point. And this is what I tell my clients too. We're not trying to get rid of these wounds. So the fact is they're still there. They're just kind of like passively hanging out. They're still a part of you. So if you think about parts work or internal family systems, we've talked about this on the show before, and I do some of this work with my clients, where you're meeting a part of you. We're not meeting a part of you so you can be like, okay, bye, like you're gone, let's get rid of you. It's just meeting a part of you to see, what does this part need? And then that part can kind of go back to the passenger seat, like go sit in the back seat. It doesn't have to drive the ship anymore. And so that's what these old wounds can surface, and that you thought you had, quote, handled. And that's totally normal. It's totally fine. Because sometimes too, I think that when these old wounds surface, a lot of times it's you thought you had handled it, but you only handled a piece of it. And now it's like, actually, this was much bigger. That was just like the tip of the iceberg. This thing was actually much bigger than you thought it was the first time. So now your nervous system is like, oh, okay, you're ready to handle this big chunk of it. So let me throw some more at you. So now you can see how big it was. And so sometimes our body's just asking us to, work with things that have been there all along. It just is bigger than we thought it was initially. Now, looking at things from kind of a relational standpoint, when you're going through this deconditioning process, your relationships will probably start to shift. Some of them might deepen, some of them might fall away, some of them might suddenly feel really suffocating and codependent. Like you're going to see things from a different light, and that's totally fine. Deepen the ones you want to deepen. Let the the ones go that you feel or have been holding you back, or maybe have been toxic or codependent, like maybe it's time to let some of those go, and that's totally fine. And another thing too, especially with family, it might be a struggle for you to explain what's happening to the people that you love and who are used to seeing the old version of you. Like it might be hard for you to, maybe it's like you setting new boundaries, or you speaking up when before you were a doormat, right? Or maybe it's, I'm healing all these people pleasing tendencies and all of these kind of good girl things. And it's like, oh, I don't know if I like this new version of you, right? These are things to think about. These are things you might have to work through. There are conversations that might need to be had with some people who may not like this new version, or they may not be ready for this new version of you. Now, for someone who really loves you, like if it's a spouse, a partner, husband, wife, that kind of thing, hopefully they're in a place where it's like, okay, I can grow with you and I can really love this new empowered version of you, right? There's conversations to be had there. And I will say, kind of on the flip side of that, there can also be a loneliness when you're surrounded by people, because you're becoming a version of you that is not someone who the people around you have been familiar with. Maybe you're outgrowing people and you're recognizing, like, I can't really relate to these people, to these relationships anymore. So there might be this feeling of loneliness. And two, I think also when you're going through, and this is just my own experience, so I'm saying this because it might be true for you. I do feel like sometimes when you're really going through it and you're in one of these kind of darker parts of the deconditioning process, it feels lonely because you feel like you're the only one suffering through it. You're like, everybody's living their nice, happy life. And I'm like, in the trenches here, taking grenades and trying to get out alive. So it just feels lonely because you feel like you're the only one going through it, which, newsflash, you're not. Everybody is going through their own crap. Like, we know that. So I think it's really important to keep that perspective where if you ever feel like that, and maybe you don't, maybe you won't, but if you ever feel that loneliness, like, man, I'm going through it and nobody else is, or nobody knows how this feels, nobody knows what it's like, I can promise you 1,000% there are plenty of people on this planet who do. So you're never going through it alone. You're never going through it on your own. So let's talk about what happens on a physical level. On a physical level, a lot of times your body gets louder. And I think sometimes we go into the deconditioning part and you're like, oh, my physical body's going to start to heal because I'm clearing out all these things and clearing out all this stagnant energy, and I'm allowing my energy to flow through, which is true. All of that is true. But sometimes it gets worse before it feels better, because it's like all of this gunk has been stored in your tissues and now it's starting to move. So different symptoms, gut issues, fatigue, all of this emotional release that you're having is going to release stuff that's been in your tissues and your cells. So if your body gets worse before it gets better, this is not a bad sign. And I'm not saying it will, it's not guaranteed, but it might. So if your body gets louder, totally normal. You also might feel an increased need for rest, for alone time, for solitude, for slowness. And I know this is really true for me, and I have to really honor those parts of me, especially the solitude thing. I'm a conscious reflector. So I am really sensitive to environment, especially when it comes to this kind of stuff. So that one for me is a non-negotiable. Like, I have to figure out times and just be really upfront, especially, with my husband, like, okay, I need to go be alone for a while. I'm going to go, just like asking for what you need is really important when you need that solitude and that rest. Your body is doing a lot of work. Even when it looks like nothing is happening, your body is doing so much work. There's so many things happening on so many different levels, and it can feel really draining. Like, you have to really honor your body in on this journey. You might also feel more sensitivity in your nervous system, like feeling overstimulated more often, needing more blank space, more white space, craving more quiet. And then sometimes there can be, and I'm just giving you all the gamut. I'm not saying all of these things are going to happen, but just kind of running the gamut here. The other thing, there can be like literal physical purging, like illness, sickness. That's happened to me before. Skin changes, sleep disruption, like all of these things. Again, as stored patterns move through your body starts to release things, and it can cause physical things to happen on the body. And then last, I want to talk about from a spiritual, energetic level. You will probably feel, I feel like this is true for everybody, you feel this kind of dissolving of what you used to believe. It's what you used to believe about yourself, about your path, maybe even your spirituality. Like, you're starting to question things, which is always good in my opinion. Critical thinking is important. Your path, again, like I mentioned, I gave you my story earlier. of how my different goals and aspirations started to feel murky and foggy and even shift. So your path could change. The practices that maybe you used to use, maybe they feel like you're forcing it or feel hollow, and they shift and change. And that's true for me. I know there was a long time where like the only thing I could do was meditation. Like that was just my go-to. And then it shifted and changed for me. And then sometimes I felt like I had set myself a goal that I was going to meditate every day, non-negotiable, blah, blah, blah. And I did that for probably 3 years straight. And then I felt my body was telling me to do, like, it wanted to do different things. It wanted to use different modalities. And I felt like I was being really dogmatic about it. And I was just doing it for the sake of doing it. And then I'm like, well, this defeats the purpose of me meditating if I'm doing it just to check it off my checklist. So then I shifted into doing some other modalities. So you might find that too, that different practices that either they used to work or feel good, they don't resonate anymore. And you might go through phases. And then there is this emptiness, the voidy space that you can get into where the old self, it's where the old self was, and then the new self hasn't fully landed yet. And just kind of being with that energetically and not getting too discouraged by being in the voidy space. And then I think this one is probably more true for me than any of them. And I have recently just really embraced this part. And this is one of the great paradoxes, one of the great mysteries of life. But it is this strange feeling of completely falling apart and being more of yourself than you ever have. And that is one of the beautiful things about this whole deconditioning process. And is one of the, again, just the paradoxes of life, to feel like everything is falling down around me. I feel like I am completely falling apart, and it's just all crumbling, but I have never felt like more like myself. Like this is when you know you are meeting parts of you that have been wanting to be seen by you for so long. And so, yes, it can feel destabilizing. Yes, it can feel tricky. But the thing is, it feels destabilizing before it feels liberating. It has to fall down. It has to collapse before it can be built back up. It's like the tower. It's like the tower and the tarot cards, the tower, has to fall to help something rebuild. That's what it is. So it's really important to embrace this concept of liminal space, that in-between space, the threshold, the void, whatever you want to call it. This is where it all, this is where the magic happens. Yes, you feel like you're kind of in this in-between because you're not really fully who you're becoming, and you're like, but I have this feeling, and I feel it more than ever. And it can also often feel like this existential thing, like I know I'm meant to be great and big, and I'm meant to do all these big things, but you're still kind of hanging out in the ethers in this liminal space. And it can be really disorienting, and it can be really frustrating for our little human minds to be like, but why am I waiting? Like, why am I still here? But I can tell you, as I mentioned earlier, like this is where you access so many parts of you would normally not be able to access. This is where it happens. So yes, the destabilization can be really frustrating, and it can be really scary too, because you're like, I don't know what's on the other side of this. I have no idea. Because really, we don't. Let's be honest. We don't. And we think we do sometimes, and we can have an idea, but we don't really know. But if we can stop trying to fast forward and just let the in-between do its job, every layer of the undoing is going to reveal something. And so when you rush it, it's just another patriarchal wound of us overriding our bodies and overriding the process. So can you just let the in-between do its job? Can you let the grief be the grief? Can you let the anger be the anger? Can you let the frustration be the frustration? Can you witness it all and not have to fix it? Can you witness these parts of you that have served you for so long, that have kept you safe and have kept you alive? And maybe it has made you successful. Maybe it has built things for you. But can you witness those and not feel like you have to fix them or get rid of them or rush them out or rush through dealing with them? Can you hold space for all of those parts of you? Can you hold space for the in-between without trying to pull yourself out before it's all done? Can you witness the falling away? Can you be with it without leaning into the fear or letting the fear win? Can you witness it without fully fully be in it without taking yourself out of it? Let yourself feel the sucky stuff. Let yourself feel the hard stuff. Also, let yourself feel the good stuff. Let yourself feel what's on the other side. When you start to feel the lightness and the shifts happening where you feel like literal weight is coming off of you because you're letting go of these conditioned parts of you. I feel like this conditioning process it's a rite of passage for all of us. It's, we talk about the dark night of the soul, and there's so many things that we can talk about in the mystic tradition that talked about this, the initiation, the quest, the dark night of the soul. I had an idea for a program. I'm gonna see what comes through with it, but talk like working through this, the dark night of the soul. But I think in Western culture, especially in modern culture, we've forgotten, we lost that. And because patriarchy says, and the masculine way of looking, wounded masculine says that it's all linear. We shouldn't have these ups and downs. And there's no reason for us to tune into these parts, that it's the emotions, the intuition, all these parts are not as important. And we just push through, and we can shove those things aside. And so the deconditioning process is not as important. It's not seen as this necessary part of our evolution and our growth. Because if the patriarchy had anything to do, they'd say, just push through. We don't need to look at all these parts. Just push through, just keep going. But there's so many metaphors we can look at in nature to illustrate this whole process. The one we talk about the most often, I think, is the butterfly and the chrysalis, right? The butterfly or the caterpillar has to go into the cocoon. It literally turns itself into goo before it can come out into this beautiful butterfly with these beautiful wings, and it can fly. So let yourself be in the goo. Let yourself sit in the goo. And if you're in the goo stage right now, can you just exhale into the goo stage? I know it's uncomfortable. I know sometimes it sucks. I know it can be painful, and there's so many things that can come up, but can you just let yourself be in the goo and know that the caterpillar doesn't stay in the cocoon forever. She comes out into this glorious butterfly after she liquefies herself first. So just know that there is another side to this. It's not all doom and gloom and being in the goo, right? You get to turn into this amazing butterfly on the other way out, or on the other side of this. And remember that our growth is a spiral. It's when things come up over and over again, it doesn't mean you're going backwards. It's not, if we can see it as a spiral instead of a ladder, I think this is a really great perspective to take. Because if you see it as a ladder, like I'm just constantly climbing the ladder, then when you get knocked down, you feel like you're regressing. Rather than if we can see it as a spiral, we're going around and around and around, but we're going up. So yeah, I can look down and see the vantage point that I saw before when I was down four levels lower. But now I'm at this higher level and I'm more resourced. I have more wisdom because I dealt with it there 4 layers lower. And now I'm up here and I can see have a different viewpoint, have a different vantage point of this thing that I've dealt with before. So if you can see it as a spiral, I think this can really help in knowing that, yes, I'm meeting this thing again. I've met this guy before, but now I can take a different approach and I can look at it from a different way, through a different lens. So that was deep, y'all. This was deeper than really longer and deeper than I anticipated. But I think the most important thing is to know that the deconditioning process is not this problem that you have to solve. And I don't want it to sound like that. It really is an initiation. It's an initiation into your most authentic self, into really meeting that soul level self. It's reclaiming parts of you that were lost. It's reclaiming your power that you gave away to, where you got the conditioning, that those external sources, and it's all part of your becoming. And I want to leave you with that. I hope this gave you some hope, pun intended, on your conditioning journey, because I really feel like we don't talk about it enough, the actual conditioning part, the deconditioning part. And to have the concept of unlearning everything you were taught about who you are and who you're supposed to be, like to unlearn all of that can feel really scary and daunting and can feel a lot of things. So I hope this helps also normalize the process for you and the journey to see that you're not doing it wrong, because there's no wrong way to do it. And if you want to dive into starting some of this and really uncovering these layers of you that have been hidden, I really recommend jumping into my workshop, Hijacked. I'll put the link in the show notes. And because it goes through all the undefined centers of your human design. So kind of looking at this from a human design perspective on where the conditioning is happening. And I go through a lot of naming, because a lot of this is so unconscious, so subconscious, we don't recognize where the conditioning is. As I mentioned in the show, it's the water we swim in. So it's hard to recognize sometimes. So this is a great workshop's a great way to start to peel back the layers for you to see like, oh, okay, now I see where the conditioning is. Now I see what parts of me aren't necessarily me. And then if you want to go deeper into the actual deconditioning process with me, that is what we're doing inside of my new memberships, these sacred spaces that I have created for women like you who are moving through all this stuff. So it is the calling. This is the level where it's like you're just getting started and you want to dive into some of these pieces and don't want to go too deep just yet. The awakening is for the woman who wants to go deeper. Maybe you've already been on the journey, or if you're like, I just want to jump headfirst in all the things, you get more support, you get one-on-one support with me. But these are my sacred spaces for women who recognize that there are pieces of them that they haven't been able to access. They recognize that this conditioning, that we're living in this paradigm where so many of us have just been conditioned by patriarchal wounds, for lack of a better way to say that, and that we've been living by these wounds. And it really is what is making us sick and tired, these patriarchal wounds that are telling us to be something that we're not. And so this is a space where we can uncover these, we can pull back the layers, we can learn about our bodies and how they work, and our energy, and our spiritual bodies and our emotional bodies, and we can reclaim our power, reclaim the trust in your body, reclaim the power that we gave away to the patriarchy and to these wounds that we were born with. So I'm so excited to create these spaces. So the calling and the awakening, both of those, the links will be in the show notes. And I will see y'all next time.